All right, everybody. So, for a little while now, I've been doing this recurring segment, and they're a lot of fun, and you guys have been really enjoying them, so I figure why not keep doing them? Where we go back, like years and years ago, and we dig up an old lefty video essay from, like, the old, like, in my opinion, golden era of leftist, like, content online. And we go over that content because, surprisingly, a lot of you in my community weren't even into politics back then. Like 3 or 4 years ago, you guys weren't even into politics. It's bizarre to me that so many of you haven't seen these videos that are so oftentimes referenced and like so fundamental to lefty memes and whatnot. Like, how many times have you heard, for example, this is a good example. Recently, I had a few chatters not understand where the sell your houses to who, their houses to who, Ben, f***ing Aquaman meme comes from. I ran into several lefties in my chat who didn't know where that line comes from. And that reminded me, holy shit, it's been nearly half a decade. And some of these videos that have literally been memeified because they're so good, there's a fair amount of lefties who have never seen these videos before. And I haven't seen a lot of them in a long-ass time. So I figured, what better way to sort of give ourselves the opportunity for, in my case, to refresh ourselves in these videos, and in your case, in a lot of your cases, to see them for the first time, than to watch them on stream and go over them and do an in-depth reaction and response to them. Less of a response and more of like a review, right? This video that we're about to respond to, or review, is from Three Arrows. It's 3 years old at this point. It came out back in 2020, which it's wild to think that 2020 was that long ago. But very early 2020. Around the time I started doing like YouTube content with politics, like really for real. I started early 2019, but it really got to be serious early 2020. So a lot of you guys weren't into politics around that time, so hopefully a lot of you guys haven't seen this video before, and perhaps many of you haven't even heard of Three Arrows and will be introduced to his content from this. In fact, there will be a link pinned in the comments down below. The top pinned comment will be a link to this video, and I highly recommend you guys go like and subscribe both Three Arrows videos and to Three Arrows channel, because they make some fantastic content. You are really, really missing out if you are not like subbed and watching their videos, because even now they're making great content, but especially the backlog, there are some real bangers that Three Arrows has made. So yeah, let's hop into watching this video. This is called, and the title in particular really interests me as like a topic for us to cover on this stream: YouTube and the politics of pessimism. I think you guys who've been watching me a lot might understand how lately the topic of this video might apply to some of the things I've been discussing. Let's hop right in.
Hey, what's up? So, I love making response videos. They are fun to make, they generally do well, and they are a great vehicle to get a larger point across. You know, someone clicks to see Steven Crowder get dunked on, and hopefully leaves with a better understanding of a certain topic. Last year, when my channel was much smaller, I took a look at a video of a YouTuber called Black Pigeon Speaks. The video, on the surface, seemed to be about the decay of the West, but that was largely just a front.
For those who don't know, Black Pigeon Speaks is a Nazi, and it was obvious back then, but even then, a lot of lefty figures, just, you gotta be careful. Like, if you're a lefty online, and you're doing a formal response to another far-right figure, or to another figure who's far-right, at least back then, you had to be a lot more careful when it came to using the word Nazi. Like, the right sees the word Nazi as their N-word. That's pretty much it, yeah. Nazi is a right-winger's N-word. Like, if you call them a Nazi, they will react like you called them the N-word. Really. It was like, if you were like a lefty figure trying to dunk on a conservative figure and you called them a Nazi or a fascist, you already lost the debate. You already lost the argument. They literally say that. Yes, they literally do say that.
To whitewash Holocaust denial and push some other garbage ideas. What sets this response video apart from my other ones is that I had to go to much greater lengths to figure out what Black Pigeon Speaks is even trying to say. When Stephen Crowder says the big reason for the First Crusade was the fall of Constantinople, it's rather easy for me to point out that this happened hundreds of years after the First Crusade. There you go, debunked. But with a statement like, the West is...
Something that a lot of people will do is sort of mythologize time periods into one bracket, despite the fact that those brackets can very much vary in size and even overlap with each other. Like, how many historical eras that you think of as being completely separate events did you get surprised to later find out happened simultaneously? Like, there are a lot of really huge world events that were happening on opposite sides of the world from each other. And you think of these, like, particular events and time periods around them as, like, very distinct, but they were happening at the same time, just on the other side of the planet. Obviously, Albert Einstein was alive during World War II. That's more common knowledge, so that's not really one. I think there was one involving the building of the pyramids. Obviously, the idea that there were mammoths still on Earth when the pyramids were being built is pretty cool, but it was a different one. It was like, when the Roman Empire fell, it's like in Asia, something that's also like really well known happened, but like when you're taught about it, they're completely different sections of history. You think of them as completely different like eras, but they happen at the same time in just different areas, but we just kind of compartmentalize them into different events and different time periods sort of implicitly in our minds. It's weird. Have you seen Ancient Apocalypse or Mini Minute Man series? No, I haven't. I have not.
Is dying because it hates...
Oh, you mean like Ancient Apocalypse, like those History Channel shows? Oh, Mini Minute Man. Yeah, he's the guy that debunks the conspiracy theory shit about history. Yeah. Wait, I know who you're talking about. Yeah, I've watched Mini Minute Man. I know what you're talking about. Yeah, he debunks the anthropology conspiracy theories and like the aliens built the pyramids type shows. Okay. Yeah, I know who you're talking about.
Hates itself and no further clarification given. It's not that easy. What is the West in this instance? How is it dying? And how would you even quantify a collection of nation-states hating themselves? It's a very bizarre thing to say as far as political commentary goes, but when you get familiar with more of his content...
It's so wild looking back at videos like this and seeing how the conservative, like, attention span changes, right? Like, back then, the big meme, if you were like a Nazi, was to say that you just cared about the West. You were scared the West was going to fall. And that was like the most common thing. And it was a dog whistle. And people didn't really know what it meant. I mean, people did know what it meant. But a lot of people, unironically, just the dog whistle flew over their heads. They didn't pick up on it. And nowadays, we know it so unanimously to be like Nazi shit. But back then, people didn't know it that way. It was just Nazis dog whistling about their Nazi shit and calling it, oh, I just want to preserve the West, and people falling for that shit. Nowadays, not so much. People are a little bit more knowledgeable of that being blatant Nazi talk, but not so much back then.
It becomes apparent that this sort of bleak narrative about inevitable collapse is almost all he talks about. So much so that a big part of his content is virtually the same. Here's an example of Black Pigeon Speaks' work regarding the UK. Number 1, Britain abolishes itself, with the thumbnail reading UKSSR, which doesn't even make sense as an abbreviation really. Number 2, UK Brave New Fahrenheit 1984. Okay. Number 3, UK Rise of the Police State. Number 4, UK The Police State via Snoopers has arrived. Then another video about how the police state has arrived. But then I guess it went away for a moment, since after that the UK is supposedly descending into a police state again. And then the uploader ends on a twist with UK Rise of the Anarcho-Tyranny State. If you're in the UK, maybe write a comment below at which state the UK currently is right now, because I've completely lost track. Anyway, all these videos are basically identical.
Nothing's changed. Nothing's changed. The right's media, made by right-wingers for right-wingers, has always used sensationalized fear as the fuel for their content. It's always what it's been. Nothing's changed.
Identical at their core. They might reference or rather misinterpret different news stories, but the takeaway never changes. Namely, the UK is either about to collapse or become an authoritarian regime or something along those lines. Now you might say, isn't that a bit cherry-picked of me to just pick 5 out of a bunch of videos? So just so we're on the same page, here's another example about the country of Canada in no particular order. Canada, the dumpster fire globalist experiment votes. Canada 2019, world's first meme.
No! 3 Arrows is making me defend Canada. Are you serious? I'm gonna have to defend fucking Canada? Fuck.
Country. Canada, the post-Western non-binary nation. Canada, the post-national meme with no future. Post-national country has no core identity. Canada abolishes itself. Canada, a nation crashing with no survivors. Canada has just joined the top 10 strongest economies in the world again,
Cringe.
by the way. Halal
Again?
Canada, diversity and the end of...
Wait, again? Wait, was Canada not in it and then was in it? Or wait, was in it, then not in it, and then now back in it? What did Canada ever do to you? I just think it's funny. I don't actually hate Canada or Canadians, I just think the memes are funny.
Of free speech. If virtue signaling was a country, it'd be Canada, a warning for America. And number 10, Canada, the next failed state. There are many, many more examples of this on the channel, and sometimes...
Canada is not a failed state. There's a lot to criticize about Canada. That's it. No, I'm just kidding. There is a lot to criticize about Canada's government, particularly like one of the most forefront issues that you'll see a lot of leftists talking about when it comes to Canada is the treatment of Indigenous peoples. Especially historically, Canada has a very bloody and extremely fucked up history when it comes to basically genociding the native population. This goes all the way back to like French colonizing of the land that would become Canada, all the way back in the day when the French and British first, settled it, and, going into the future. And even to this day, there's some really fucked up shit. Obviously, the oil pipeline protesters that they, fucking bulldoze through. Because what people need to realize that fascism looks similar everywhere, and people say the same talking points about Canada as the U.S. Yeah, a lot of fascists that we've had to deal with, on the left, in the American left, are from Canada, ironically enough. But at the end of the day, America and its politics are so elevated, so, vitriolic and so inflamed that even Canadian and British right-wing pundits basically exclusively talk about American politics. Because American politics is the easiest to sensationalize, and all right-wing news media is all about sensationalism. It dies without the sensationalism.
He goes as far as to just re-record a video he made in the past, but switch things around a bit. Here's a section of the video, California, America's first third world state, and Dystopia California, Window to America's Future, side by side.
If California was an independent nation, it would be the 17th most unequal country in the world, tucked just between Honduras and Guatemala. Yes, those countries that send migrant caravans to the border now on a race.
Hey, you gotta hit that 10-minute timestamp, You gotta hit that 10 minutes for maximum mid-roll ads. What's he gonna do? He's gotta get those mid-roll ads. It's all about the money.
Regular basis.
Canada, for example.
Yeah, it's echoing because he's playing two different videos side by side where it's the same audio. Well, it's not the same audio, it's the same script. He just fluffs up his videos to get the maximum amount of time he can squeeze in mid-rolls.
In comparison to the social democracies California attempts to ape, well, Canada, for example, is the 111th, and Norway is the 153rd most unequal countries, and that is out of 100.
Amazing. Before we go further into that, I don't really feel the need to point out that Black Pigeon Speaks is actually way more extreme in his political views than he can openly admit on a public platform. Myself and others already made videos laying that out, but I'm just gonna throw one in for good measure. Maybe you just caught that one of the thumbnails read the sentence Day of the Rake, which is a 4chan meme about the annexation or destruction of Canada. It's also a reference to the fiction book The Turner Diaries, in which at one point everyone in the US who is deemed a race traitor gets publicly hanged in an event called Day of the Rope. The book is basically the Bible of American white supremacists and is said to have inspired numerous terror attacks like the Oklahoma City bombing or the 1999 London nail bombings, as well as a bunch of other stuff. But again, whitewashing Holocaust denial is probably enough to indicate someone's politics. The UK and Canada are far from being...
Yeah, so a lot of Nazis on 4chan and whatnot will originate these very esoteric memes that when referenced, you're probably not going to pick up on them. And then like a year later, or whatever, you'll be like, wait, that's a Nazi meme? Damn it. And you'll remember you heard that somewhere and you'll be like, fuck, that person was doing a Nazi meme. That'll happen. A lot of like esoteric Nazi dog whistles originate from 4chan and like other message boards like that. And I feel like if you've never been on the right, if you don't know like how they devise their bizarre dog whistles, it's hard to identify them, but eventually you start to get good at it.
The only topics Black Pigeon Speaks repeats endlessly on his channel, and when boiled down to basics, most of his videos aren't really about anything. All the information given to the viewer only serves the purpose of painting a doomsday scenario. The collapse of your country, the EU, or the West as a whole is seemingly always imminent, and there's almost never a point in exploring any subject beyond giving the viewers an apocalyptic outlook of their situation. The goal of these videos doesn't revolve around what is said, but how it lands with the viewer. For example, on his channel or his second channel Felix Rex, he uses every historical concept he can find to convince his viewers that it's all about to go south with no chance of preventing catastrophe. Well, not no chance, but we'll get to that. Like in the video Caesarism, the Decline of the West, where he uses the theories of Oswald Spengler, which claimed that the societies most of us live in have already reached their peak in culture, art, and general level of progress.
Hank Schrader?
What is left for us is just to witness...
Look, it's Hank Schrader. Hank! Hank, no!
...as a nation on its downturn with literally no way of stopping it. Not only that, but all contemporary culture, for instance your favorite movie, is actually trash. According to Spengler, it is impossible for us to create anything as valuable as what came before, simply because the time when your society...
This is also the phase that every single Reddit atheist goes through, where they think that all good stories and concepts have been executed, and anything that's made after the point of, like, Shakespeare, I guess, is all just rehashes and retreads of something already made, and thus no originality exists. This is, of course, very stupid. Like, beyond stupid. And the older you get, the more you realize, this is very dumb. I don't know why that is a widely held belief by adults, but I feel like a lot of Reddit atheist types go through that phase.
Produce great culture has already passed. In an essay called Pessimism, he writes, "Germany will never again produce another Goethe." Although it's not always spelled out like Spengler does.
But the point of this, essentially, is the idea that we as a culture and a society and a civilization, most importantly, have reached our peak. It's only down from here unless we do something to prevent the downward trend. And if there is no downward trend, there oftentimes isn't, because I'd say humanity's been on a pretty exponentially upward trajectory for quite a long time now. If there is no downward trend, they invent a downward trend.
Political videos by Black Pigeon Speaks follow his footsteps of conveying a feeling of hopelessness. Information gets thrown at the viewer completely out of context or regardless of accuracy, as long as it creates a version of reality that's bleak and depressing. It's much, much different from, for instance, a Steven Crowder video, which mostly exists to simply misinform and for Steven to make money. In that sense, I would go as far as to say the content of Black Pigeon Speaks is closer to fiction than any political commentary I'm familiar with. Apart from ISIS recruiting videos, I can really only think of a single piece of media outside of YouTube that impacts whoever views these videos regularly in a similar fashion. A few years ago, I stumbled over a series of books called The Red Riding Quartet by author David Peace. The events in the series mainly revolve around two things. One is the hunt for a serial killer named the Yorkshire Ripper, and the other one is a series of child abduction cases. What sets this series apart from other crime fiction books is that the experience of reading it is nothing short of repulsive and depressing. Not only through the plot, but how the story is conveyed. They are written in a way that makes it almost impossible to follow the plot for a big chunk of the series. The information the reader gets always feels significant, but it's hard to find any real meaningful connection between one piece of information and another. In the murder mystery genre, it often feels like each chapter gives you a new puzzle piece until you are able to grasp the big picture. In the Red Riding Quartet, it is as if you receive puzzle pieces belonging to an entirely different puzzle. Rather than solving a crime case, the book puts much more effort into conveying a feeling of getting punched in the stomach. Certain bits of information or descriptions, or the constant repetition of specific sentences, serve no purpose at all except making you feel bad and drawing you further into this world. At the end of the series, you might have made several connections of who has done what horrible thing, but the last pages render it all completely meaningless. Spoilers ahead, by the way. At the climax of the last book in the series, one of our main characters finds the hideout where an abducted child has been taken, but he's too late to save it. In addition to that, he finds out that anybody who could have done something about this child abuse and murdering either already knows of its existence or was actively part of it, including his own deceased father. The series leaves you with a feeling of complete emptiness, and even worse, you're the stupid one for expecting that there would be anything positive at the end. The only meaningful difference between the Red Riding Quartet and content like Black Pigeon Speaks is that one at least admits it is fiction. Now I know upon first hearing me say this, it sounds a little far-fetched, comparing political commentary to a work of fiction.
It's not far-fetched at all. That type of story is essentially like misery fuel. Like it's the kind of story someone wants to read when they just want to feel miserable. And that's the same reason that most conservatives spend the time they do on a lot of these like boards. Like go to 4chan and go to Poll. A lot of those people are very clearly miserable, and browsing and posting on Poll does not make them happy. They are not having their lives made happier by browsing and posting on Poll, and yet they spend an unhealthy amount of hours per day on Poll. The reason for it is they have a drive, an insatiable drive to be exposed to negative content that fuels an unending wormhole of negativity. Hate, fear, and sadness are the three biggest emotions that drive conservatives. It's their motivation, hate, fear, and sadness. And they need fuel for that motivation to exist. If that fear, hate, and sadness goes away, they usually fall out of being conservatives. How many people, including maybe even yourselves, can you think of that got out of the right-wing, like, echo chamber? You got out of the alt-right pipeline or whatever? And it wasn't necessarily entirely of or because you were exposed to left-wing ideas. It was in large part because your life and your mindset changed in such a way that you were no longer just looking for misery and validation of your miserable mindset. Like you stopped just like one day you just decided I'm not gonna browse incel forums or chan boards. I'm just gonna like, I don't know, like browse through YouTube and see what comes up. That's how it happens for a lot of people. Maybe they get into a relationship that makes them happy. Maybe they start, they get their first job, or they start like getting into a group of friends. For a lot of people, it really is just that simple to get them out of the right. For a lot of people, what's keeping them in the right is this constant fueling of this negativity black hole they have inside of them.
But I would argue that reading the Red Riding Quartet gives you about just as much a truthful image of the events it portrays as Black Pigeon Speaks does with the events he talks about. They both create a fictionalized version of reality. The Yorkshire Ripper really existed, as well as the child abduction cases the book is based on, but that's really about it. They just serve as a basis for the story. The studies or news stories Black Pigeon Speaks picks serve the exact same function. Here's an example that is supposed to indicate that Britain is abolishing itself.
The UK's capital now has more murders in real terms than New York City for the first time in modern history, but devotes its resources to prosecute native citizens that make posts critical of the increasing enrichment of their city on social media.
So this is a great example because it brings something up that is technically true, but the extrapolation drawn from it is complete nonsense. Talking about London's murder rate exceeding the one of New York is supposed to convey the feeling that British society is deteriorating with crime spiraling out of control. According to the news story, it is true that there was a short stretch in 2018 during which the murder rate of London topped that of New York. When we take a look at the broader picture though, it becomes clear that it's not the result of London's skyrocketing murder rate, but rather the result of New York's falling murder rate. In addition to that,
that's so good. That's so fucking good, especially when you consider how much the right tries to use the concept of crime in New York as an own on Democrats. Like, a conservative tries to say, "Oh yeah, the left has made London so unsafe and so bad, the murder rate is worse than New York." Actually, the reason for that is London's murder rate has maintained a pretty low, if not, you can see it's actually on a pretty... it's steadily dropping from a very low position that it started at. It's still been dropping, but New York's murder rate is dropping so low that it's starting to get as low as London. Yeah, it's just the biggest cell phone ever if you actually research it, which is usually what it is, right? Like, with conservatives, they don't just lie. They'll lie about something specific. That if you actually inform yourself on what they're lying about, not only are they lying, the thing they're lying about, they come up with the lie. They introduce the lie when, like, the thing related to it wasn't even part of the discussion. And then when you look into their lie, you found out the thing they're lying about actually extra disproves everything they believe in and proves what you believe in. That is how dishonest they are.
In the time frame the headline is based on, there was an unusually high number of murder cases in London and an unusually low number of murder cases in New York. In the entire year of 2018, the murder rate in New York was still twice as high as in London, despite the downward trend. It's not an indicator of anything, especially not Britain abolishing itself. This statistical outlier that is way more representative of New York's success than London's failure is not enough to assume a general trend. When it comes to the talking points he brings up in his videos like this one, it really doesn't matter though if they are truthful or that the conclusion of the video logically follows. These videos are based on true events, so to say. I'll show you another example from the video I mentioned earlier.
Gotta have the spooky music.
There is very much a civilizational crisis across the entirety of the Western world. Our nations are buried under so much debt that it would previously have been unimaginable. Unfunded liabilities that are bankrupting nations as the boomers retire en masse.
So the collapse of the West is imminent, nothing new so far, but what follows after is another great example of guff meant to scare the viewer. A high national debt barely tells us anything about the overall financial state of a country. The reason he brings this up is because someone who doesn't know any better would think of the type of debt.
So basically, conservatives back then especially, it's less common now because... less so because I think people understand the concept of national debt, and more so because it's just a boring topic to try to start culture war stuff on. But the idea was that under the control of Democrats, America ends up having a really high national debt, right? And then under Republicans, they eliminate the national debt. And they kind of... They basically operate either overtly saying or under the... like, clearly with the implication under the assumption that national debt works like personal debt, where it's like you owe someone. That's not how it works. From my understanding, and it's more complicated than this, and I'm not going to be able to fully understand, I'm not going to be able to fully explain it, but essentially, the way national debt functions is as a disparity, a literal numbers disparity between how much one country is investing in another country. For example, China and America. There's a lot of talk about the debt that we have to China. And it's talked about like it's a really bad thing, but it's actually not. Our high national debt to China actually gives China incentive for America to do okay. China wants to see economic reimbursement for the amount of money that we spend, or the amount of money and resources they put into things that we buy. They want to see that come back. They want to see the economic benefit that's going to bring. When we have a very high national debt to a country, that's not a bad thing for us. It doesn't affect the economy in a negative way unless, I guess, we shut down the government. I remember when I was like 12 or 11. I was in middle school, and Obama was president, and the first ever government shutdown I remember happened. And I remember I woke up, and my mom was like talking about there being a government shutdown. I was like, whoa, 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 hold on. The government shutdown? What? Okay, hold on. Should I, like, go pack a bag? Like, is it over? Is it all over? Like, what do you mean? You're acting so casual. You're telling me the government shut down, and I'll go get my bag. Like, we gotta go. Like, it's over. You know, that was my reaction, right? But then I went to school that day, and in history class, they explained what that meant. But, yeah, I mean, national debt is literally the only negative thing that comes out of America having a high national debt to other countries, particularly China, is Republicans weaponize it against Democrats. That's literally it. If anything, it's a sign of a healthy economy.
They might have with a credit card company and think this must be really bad. And not to get too deep into this, but the sheer amount of debt doesn't tell us much, because if a country makes a lot of money, them having a bit more debt isn't really that big of a deal. A better indicator would be the debt to gross domestic product ratio. In the US, for instance, it's currently quite high.
And America is obviously one of the most wealthy nations in the world, so it's like we are not going to go bankrupt. America, one of the best examples of this, and this is something you can do to reassure yourself, America is not like going to go into debt and like die out. The American dollar is the basis of the vast majority of American economics. Or not American economics, of world economics. Like, the US dollar is the basis of a bunch of that shit, is the comparison point. A lot of it is literally based on the US dollar. Like, our money basically makes this economy function on a worldwide level. If we fail, the world fails. Everyone's invested in us. And everyone we're invested in wants us to do well because we're invested in them. If America falls apart and, like, there's no more America anymore, like, all the electronics we buy from China, that goes away, right? Like, I don't know. I don't need to talk about national debt. It's boring.
Partially because of Trump's tax cut, which mostly benefited the super rich, but it's not a record high, so I don't know why this would have been previously unthinkable, as the video states. Jumping to a different country like Germany, the ratio is actually pretty good and has dipped below the one of 2007. Looking at the entire Eurozone, it's also lower than it was 4 years ago. But even a high debt to GDP ratio doesn't have to be a bad thing, especially right now where borrowing money is dirt cheap. So much so that it might be better for a country to just refinance that debt than to pay it off. What really matters is not the amount of debt, but the interest rate it's borrowed at. A lot of that debt also is usually intragovernmental, so money the government owes to its own agencies to fund things like social security. And even if none of that mattered, if the entire world is horribly in debt, who do you think that money is owed to? Wouldn't that be like us. 4 friends each lending $50 to one another?
Ironically enough, us. Like, probably us. Probably some business based in America that runs its manufacturing out of China. We're probably mostly in debt to ourselves.
I think you get the idea. But nuance like that would ruin the punch of hearing our countries are horribly in debt. Debt equals bad. That's why this talking point is in the video. Also, while the boomers retiring will most likely cause a spike in social spending, them leaving the workforce also has the potential to bring in new people.
It sounds even scarier after the 2008 financial crisis. Like, millennials who lived through the 2008 financial crisis use words like national debt, and they're going to be too scared and too stupid to look into it, and they're just going to listen to whatever you have to say about the Democrats being bad.
Who previously had trouble finding a job. It's not as much a doomsday scenario as our narrator makes it out to be, although it's definitely a challenge. He goes on to talk about the theories of Spengler, who we talked about before, and specifically his...
Oh, here's a good example, actually. The 2008 financial crisis was so bad that Europeans and like people in Asia, in Asian countries and whatnot, felt it too. The whole world felt the 2008 financial crisis, and that was an American thing. Like, we are the economy. America is the economy. And the idea that America, you see a lot of these memes, for example, that the average empire or nation lasts for like 350 years on average, and America is coming up on that like time frame, and so America's approaching its inevitable like lifespan of like falling, like America's gonna fall, like the fall of Rome. You see a lot of Nazi posting about that. But like, could you imagine how catastrophically world-ending it would be if America fell? Not to mention the fall of Rome was like an event that took place over the course of like decades and decades, even centuries, I think. It wasn't like a thing that happened overnight. The fall of Rome was like a very long, prolonged, like generational, like loss of land and influence and culture and all that shit. Anyway, like, yeah, they basically act as though like in the span of a year, America's just going to destroy itself due to, I guess, civil war or something. But, like, imagine how apocalyptic of an event that would be for the entire rest of the world. Genuinely.
This idea of Caesarism, described in his book Der Untergang des Abendlandes, or The Decline of the West. According to Spengler, history, rather than being viewed linear, should be seen as functioning in cycles and to follow the same patterns each time. In this theory, the last phase of a civilization is ushered in by the abolition of democracy and a strong, Caesar-esque figure taking over. The supposed conclusion of this video is that we are currently at this stage of Caesarism and bases that on information like a poll taken in the UK.
So he just, like I said, he just brought up Rome. So like, just as I said, the idea that America is the next Rome is basically what these people play into. It's a large part of why they play into the statues, the white marble statues. It's like, it's LARPing, and it's all tied back to that fundamental idea that America has this like set timetable till it's like till it falls, and the inevitable fall will be caused by progressivism, I guess.
Chile to Spain, the US to Italy, and points in between, civilization exhaustion and trust in the political process and in democracy itself is eroding and spilling into the streets violently. Political gridlock today is no better exemplified than that by the failure, despite a political mandate provided by popular referendum over 3 years ago, for the United Kingdom to exit from the European Union. And the disgust with the political class.
My favorite videos are conservative videos complaining about how the first Brexit vote didn't go through. Like after Brexit happened, and it was just the most unanimously agreed upon, like, mistake ever. So much so to the point that a shit ton of Brexiters, I don't know if you guys knew this, by the way, a ton of Brexiters didn't think that was the actual vote. A ton of people who voted Brexit didn't think that was the actual official vote, and were and literally just marked Brexit because they thought it was like a test vote, essentially, and they didn't know what was going to happen. Yeah, unironically, a large, like a scary amount of Brexiters or Brexit voters didn't even just regret their vote. They didn't mean to actually vote Brexit. I don't think that's true. Dude, I remember there was a news story about this back in 2016, or was it 2017? Back when Brexit happened. There were a bunch of British people who didn't know that was the actual legit, like, that's it. Like, there's no going back vote. They thought it was like a test vote or like a trial vote type thing. And then, of course, there's a ton of people who voted Brexit that regret it. It was like just a massive mistake. Wasn't there like a huge economic crash in Britain after Brexit? Like, didn't the pound drop down to like just a scary low amount? Like, very similar to what happened to the ruble during, like, at the start of the war. I remember Nafuckers was doing videos at the start of the war, and he's Russian, so he was like, you know, he's obviously against the war, but he went to a store to buy milk, and the milk was like, the inflation had resulted in the milk being like 2,000 rubles for a gallon of milk or something. The Aussie dollar beat the British pound. Wow. I thought they accidentally pushed the wrong button to cast their vote or something like that. I don't remember exactly what it was, but it was a grim news story. It was a bunch of like British people getting interviewed, and they were like, "Yeah, I didn't know that was like the final vote. I thought there was gonna be like another one to officiate it. I didn't know that was it. And if I could, this is like the night, like the morning after the vote. And if I knew that was the only one, I wouldn't have voted for Brexit. I just wrote it in as like a meme. England didn't recover from GFC, so Brexit ranked them. Oh, for sure wait, are you? Oh, you're talking about something else. My bad. I love Nafuckers, his coverage on the war. Yeah, his videos are really good. I like Nafuckers. He's kind of like a bread tuber, but not. He's in a very interesting niche.
Has now become so entrenched and so thorough that in fact a majority of people in England, Wales and Scotland now believe that violence against members of parliament is a price worth paying if it meant that their views on Brexit won out. And that is a majority of people, both Leavers and Remainers, according to a recent poll taken by academics from the University of Edinburgh and Cardiff for YouGov. And also shockingly, there was a large percentage of people surveyed who said that turning on their fellow citizens could be justified, even if it resulted in them being badly injured, if it settled Brexit in their favor.
So we have the assertion that a majority of voters in the UK say violence against MP is worth it to get Brexit their way, with this being another indicator of society falling apart. Putting aside that I don't see how a poll on Brexit would speak for any country but the UK, the claim put forward in the video is a flat-out lie. What the poll actually said was that a majority of those surveyed did see violence against MPs as a risk worth taking to get their preferred Brexit outcome. Now that might not sound like much of a distinction at first, but when we dig deeper into the poll it makes all the difference. For instance, a person answering the question of the poll might think the risk is worth it because they deem that risk to be rather low. The same poll concluded that 66% of Leave voters thought violence being directed towards MPs was unlikely if Britain left the EU. Apart from that, the survey didn't even include a possible answer for people who didn't see violence towards MPs as a risk, or people who thought there would be a risk of violence either way. It would be like asking me if I accept the...
I said earlier in the video, if there is no downward decline, they'll invent one.
...the possibility of being hit by a car when I go outside to walk my extremely good and cute dog. Obviously, I'd say yes, because I think the risk of that happening is very low. Someone extrapolating from my answer that I'm willing to die in a car crash to get my dog the proper exercise would be ridiculous. It's the same with the second claim our narrator makes, where 38% of those surveyed said protests in which members of the public are badly injured are a risk worth taking. It's also possible that some of those surveyed didn't take the poll seriously or didn't understand some of the questions, since according to the reported data, 5% say they want to get substantially poorer regardless of Brexit, and about 11% say they want the party they support to lose the next general election. But again, none of these...
Yeah, I think a fair amount of people might not have understood the questions. I can't imagine anyone answering those questions yes.
These facts matter to Black Pigeon Speaks, because that headline sounds bad. That's the only thing that counts. Another good example of that is Spengler's theory on the decline of the West in itself, because Europe already went through its Caesarism phase. Spengler, despite being a huge anti-Semite, didn't think Hitler was the right guy for the job of the German Caesar, but put his trust into Italian dictator Benito Mussolini. And that glorious Caesar phase for Italy? Yeah, never really happened. The only thing he really accomplished was driving Italy into the historical ditch and end up mutilated hanging upside down from a gas station. And guess what? Italy, Germany, they're still there, doing much better than during their time under a dictatorial regime. But putting all that to the side, you might ask yourself, how does Spengler argue for his theory of history as cycles when that simply just doesn't match reality? Well, that's a very good question with an entertaining answer. Spengler saw history as a living organism and compared it to a caterpillar, which you wouldn't expect to just keep on growing and stay a caterpillar forever. But for us, and for a Black Pigeon Speaks, it's not that important to go into Spengler's weird musings about his overall perception of history, because he is only interested in what he and Spengler want to communicate. Back then, and to this day, The right replaces actual history with mysticism and uses that as a tool to push their ideas. You know, we have to curb immigration because that's the way the Roman Empire fell and nonsense like that. The reason why Black Pigeon Speaks and the right in
I will say, I do love making an argument or like paraphrasing a thing that right-wingers argue, and then the video we're watching does exactly that. And reminder, I haven't watched this video in 3 years. I don't remember anything about it. So like, this isn't me having well, I have pre-watched technically, but I don't remember any of it. So, you know, this isn't me like remembering what happens. It's just these conservatives, they're very predictable, and their propaganda, it changes on the surface level, but when you, like, if you actually get down to the nitty-gritty, the core of why conservatives say what they say, those reasons never change. The reason why conservatives say what they do never change. But what they're saying does. And if you know why they say what they say, then you can immediately, like, dismantle what they're saying and how they're trying to get their thoughts across through their dishonesty. Because remember, conservatives are rarely honest. Nazis are rarely honest. Fascists, as you can imagine, lie.
General are interested in Spengler is not his comparing history to a tree or a caterpillar, but his pessimism. There's even a German word for that kind of person that our narrator fits to a T. It's called a Zweckpessimist, or purposeful pessimist, who make a big show of how terrible everything is to get a certain reaction, and in this case, exploit it. Spengler's work is interesting to study in terms of cultural impact, since he was widely read in Germany's interwar years and really tapped into the pessimism towards the country's future. When it comes to the actual content of the book, though, it's worthless, pseudo-historical trash. But even if all that is true, and this entire channel runs on misinformation, how does this mean that Black Pigeon Speaks doesn't actually care about what he is saying, and that only the effect matters? The simple answer is that there's absolutely no indication that he cares about the coherence of his ideas in the slightest. Let's jump to a different recent video on his second channel, Felix Rex, titled Endgame, The Fall of the West. It starts out with the usual incoherent rambling about how civilization will most likely collapse soon, and then puts forth a historical theory just as we have seen in the video before. This one is based on the writing of Sir John Glubb and his paper The Fate of Empires and Search for Survival. In this paper, he claims empires or superpowers have a lifespan of about 250 years, excluding outliers like
I literally referenced this earlier. I got it wrong, though. I said 350 years. It's 250 years. The Nazis like to claim that America is approaching its inevitable lifespan of where it'll fall, like the Roman Empire. I fucking love predicting the shit Nazis. These people they're so predictable. These people's ideology, they just say a lot of random breakneck bullshit to make it sound like what they believe is more complicated than it is. But once you understand it at a fundamental level, it's all so simple. And you know exactly the kind of shit they're going to say before they even say it.
The German Empire, for instance. And I really don't want to get too deep into this because I consider it a waste of time. But broadly speaking, there is no systemic model that comprehensively explains everything in history. The reason why the vast majority of historians do not adhere to these models is that they do not sufficiently explain the past, neither do they reliably predict the future. Glubb even admits in his paper that the dates his theory is based on are largely arbitrary. The Ottoman Empire, for instance, remained a great power after 1570, even though they were entering a period of decline.
The fall of what you might call the Roman Empire happened over the course of hundreds of years. It was like a very drawn out, like, political and like world. So like there was just so many things that happened, so many like intersecting reasons that happened. It's just America is not in that kind of position. Like if you want to compare Rome to America, it's just the positions that these two empires are in, completely different. Like on the surface, it's a similar comparison. Like, the most powerful, empires in the world, the golden beacons of civilization, right? Like that's the meme. But like, if you're trying to compare like some fall of the empire narrative, it's just not there. The Roman Empire fell between 100 and 1400 AD, literally over 1,000 years. It's just, Yeah, it's a long period of time. It was not like overnight the Civil War destroyed the nation. Like, but that's how these people talk about it.
The Byzantine Empire, which isn't listed here, even lasted for over 1,000 years. And while Glubb tries to acknowledge outliers by comparing the lifespan of empires to that of a human that allows for variation, no human reaches 4 or 5 times their average life expectancy. Your theory becomes useless at that point because history, apart from not being a caterpillar, is also not like a human. The reason why I'm talking about Glubb's theory as indication that our narrator doesn't care about what he is saying is that while Glubb is obviously influenced by Spengler, he ultimately disagrees with his model of historical cycles. Spengler rejected the idea that history just keeps on going.
Conservatives love citing people that completely disagree with what they believe. I mean, hell, look at how often conservatives try to weaponize Martin Luther King and act like Dr. Martin Luther King would have agreed with them if he was alive today.
Going in a linear fashion, well, Glubb writes this in his paper. To derive any...
Like, fuck, imagine if the far-right interests hadn't fucking murdered him. It's almost like, yeah, he'd probably be in favor of those same people today.
Useful instruction from history, it seems to me essential, first of all, to grasp the principle that history, to be meaningful, must be the history of the human race. For history is a continuous process, gradually developing, changing and turning back, but in general moving forward in a single mighty stream. Any useful lessons to be derived must be learned by the study of the whole flow of human development, not by the selection of short periods here and there in one country or another. In the video this theory is brought up, there is no attempt to reconcile these two.
Oh yeah, actually, very good point from Twitch chat. Obviously of George Orwell, who wrote 1984, and also, obviously, they love, fuck, I can't remember the name. They love using 1984 as like, their big, like, oh, you my god, this is like the treatise on what the left wants to do to the world. Oh my god, they want to turn the world into Oceania. And it's like, okay, you understand that George Orwell was a democratic socialist, right? Like, George Orwell was very open about the fact he was, I believe it was democratic socialist. I don't think he was trying to predict an authoritarian left-wing society. I think it was just supposed to be authoritarian. Like, it wasn't even authoritarian right. I wouldn't even say it was like fascism. I don't even think that Oceania was far right like authoritarianism. It was more of just a very centrist, almost partisan authoritarianism. Authoritarianism for nothing other than authoritarianism's sake. Like, just completely removed from any political left or right bias, just... It is a story about a authoritarian society and its imposition of its will on the people. Like, it could be a Nazi society. It could be, like, the USSR. It could be either. It could be a stand-in for either. It's just a narrative on authoritarianism purely.
With one another or even acknowledge the contradictions.
That's
Ultimately,
my read of it.
Glubb's and Spengler's models are incompatible, and the one thing they have in common is an effort to be as pessimistic as possible. And to me, this really lays bare the aim of content like this. Portraying studies, events, or even outdated historical theories in an honest way, or not regurgitating something talked about 15 times already, all comes secondary to the effort of depressing the viewer. This, interwoven with videos on how women destroy civilizations, for instance, is supposed to lay the groundwork for the political project of the channel. And just to zoom in on this a bit, even if these videos didn't have the aim to pull people to the far right, or you don't believe they do, they still have the potential to be incredibly harmful. Let's say you don't end up a Groiper or whatever dorky stuff these people are into these days. Maybe you just think Spengler is correct and believe doom is inevitable, or buy the argument that women really do destroy civilizations. Just believing a bunch of these assertions on their own, it's easy to see how this content, well, I would say, furthers social isolation and prevents you from making meaningful connections in your life. A less sensitive way someone else might say it is turning you into a massive, constantly sad loser. Think of yourself as an impressionable young guy and stumbling over a video about how women destroy civilizations and buying it wholesale. Imagine making your first experiences with...
The crazy thing is, Vosh made this exact same argument and got shit on endlessly by the left. Like, he basically made the argument of, like, imagine being like a young dude, and the only, like, people who are making content that's, like, directed at people in your demographic and trying to offer advice is conservative propaganda that's trying to use, like, give you life advice with politics as a chaser to it, you know? A little bit of life advice to the side of politics. A little bit of side of Nazi propaganda.
Women, while always having in the back of your head that they're fundamentally disloyal and will leave you to gain any advantage. And then when you're totally socially inept and incapable of connecting to other people, you get hit with the solution, which is packaged as constituting society along different lines, as he says at the end of the video.
In the coming troubles that have been brought about by the decadence in our civilization, we will hear inevitable calls for order and assurances of renewed stability. But there's always going to be a price for this. And yes, maybe the experiment in universal suffrage, for example, has run its course. Or maybe a reorientation of society is needed. Or as yet, something unclear or unknown.
Wow, this is so ahead of its time. This is so ahead of its time. This was this was actually the video that he's responding to was from 2019. Black Pigeon Speaks made this video in 2019. This was so ahead of its time. This is before the rise of Andrew Tate and the Matrix memes. Well, I guess the red pill was a meme. But, like, this is before Andrew Tate popularized the whole we're living in the Matrix.
Can be worked out in the future. Adjustments will, of course, have to be made along new ways of problem solving. It's either this or the alternative.
Naturally, he never actually gets into the specifics of what he wants to happen, because he'd be banned off the platform if he did. What he does instead is tiptoe around what he really wants to say and uses sentences like adjustments will have to be made, and that when doing so, we shouldn't shy away from being called illiberal, which is the advertiser-friendly way of advocating for the restriction of personal freedoms. If you would only throw your fellow citizens under the bus who are anything but straight cis-white males, then you'll be good to go, and the fictitious reality that you have been sold previously won't be as bleak. I'm not gonna lie and pretend that I know what it's like to have such a dark outlook as Black Pigeon Speaks sells his viewers, but even the thought to be in that headspace, to never be able to leave Yorkshire, so to say, and live in that world, sends shivers down my spine. Now I get this might come off as me making excuses for someone who shares Black Pigeon Speaks' worldview after watching his videos and empathizing with people who maybe don't deserve it. And while I think these people should be held accountable for their beliefs, just looking at this content like I have before and focusing on the accuracy of the displayed information leaves out why it is there in the first place. These videos aren't simply bad because they're full of lies, but also because they're by design predatory. One thing this look at Black Pigeon Speaks content as a piece of media really has drawn into focus for me is to what pathetic means the far right has to resort to spread their ideas. Not only twisting studies or news stories, that's always been obvious, but also to fester and then exploit social isolation. When the left says to be a fascist is to be a loser, since it's an ideology that history shows to always fail, the far right seemingly has taken that literally and acknowledged that they have to make you vulnerable to even get a foot in the door. The argument always boils down to desperate times call for desperate measures. And if you're not desperate yet, well, let me tell you a thing or two. And by things, I mean lies. Obviously. Thank you for watching, everyone.
That is a very good video. That was a very, very good video. Obviously, the title, you know, had me interested, and I'd seen the video a long time ago, back when it came out, over 3 years ago now. It's almost been 4. Yeah, that is a really, really good one. I've always loved Three Arrows videos. I've always thought they're very well put together, and I've never felt that he is, like, part of that woke scoldy sphere of lefty video essayists. I feel like he genuinely, like, he really does his research. He doesn't seem like the kind of guy that just hears a rumor or hears something about someone or something and just rolls with it because it's convenient. And I really appreciate that. And he doesn't seem like he's opposed to the idea of, like, understanding why someone who is conservative would end up in that position. There's so many lefty video essayists, and it's always the video essayists for some reason. I don't know why. They make great content a lot of the time, but then their takes on Twitter are just awful. They seem to act as though trying to put yourself in the shoes of someone on the right and understand how a normal person could get to that place is wrong. In fact, we covered a drama, more of a harassment campaign, that was happening on Twitter recently to a user named Tori. When she was young, she was raised up into a far-right racist cult. Like, literally a far-right religious cult. And obviously, when she became an adult, she got freedom and stopped being racist because she was no longer forced to live in a far-right religious cult. But back when she was in that far-right religious cult, she'd posted a bunch of racist stuff online. That's things racists do, but she's not racist anymore and hasn't been for a long time. These are 10-year-old tweets. But a bunch of woke scolds on Twitter found it and tried to use it as justification to rally together a massive hate brigade. And the vast majority, it was very interesting to see that happen to her as well, because it very clearly demonstrated how dishonest it all is. But I don't want to stun lock into that too much. My point is that drama demonstrated to me how much of the left is opposed to even seeing things from the perspective of conservatives. Not from the dishonest conservatives, but from the victims of conservative propaganda. How one can be victimized by that, and how one who is not inherently a bad person can fall for Nazi propaganda or far-right propaganda. It's like you're not allowed to try to think about that. You can't empathize with them. And it is important to empathize with them. You have to understand how they think in order to fight what they believe.